I want to just talk a little bit about, what happens in a municipality. And just to start, most of you know Greenwich is the westernmost town in Connecticut in Long Island Sound. And we do have a really big tidal range there. And obviously some of the challenges we have with the tidal range, but also the idea of the fetch. When there's a lot of water piling up into Long Island Sound, we get hit hard. And just to put that in perspective, during Sandy, we had our normal tidal elevation is somewhere between 3.5, 5.5 feet for high tide. If it's a moon tide, we might get 5.5 feet water elevation. During Sandy, we had 10.5 feet at low tide. So if it had hit at high tide, we would have had over 15 feet of water elevation NAVD in Greenwich. So that just to give you a perspective about where we are. So do you want me to do it, or? Okay.
It's whatever you're doing.
Okay. And so I always talk about municipalities being on the front line, and whether it's doing living shorelines or the emergency response, when you're talking about climate change adaptation, coastal resiliency, dealing with emergency preparedness. We do a lot of work with our state and federal partners, but the bottom line is it happens at the municipal level. And one of our challenges is that we're dealing with municipal officials who usually are elected every 2 years in Connecticut. So we have a rotation of educating folks about that, and very, very little knowledge about natural resources. They don't understand sea level. Forget about sea level rise. They don't understand what sea level is. They all navigate. They all have boats, so you think they would understand this, but they really don't understand the tidal dynamics. They don't understand the difference between a surge versus water elevation. So there's a big, big learning curve there. And then they don't understand the natural systems and the way that plays in. So as a municipal staff person, we're often dealing with the volunteers that are our elected officials and wanting to protect the community. But we're also dealing with our facilities folks, our Department of Public Works, our Parks and Rec folks, who have a little bit better understanding, but a lot of times are the folks who are on the front line during emergency response, and their job is to hurry up, get the community back to normalcy, and not looking at the long term. And a lot of times it is, whether it be the Conservation Commission, Inland Wetland Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commissions, it's your land use agencies that a lot of times are taking that the bigger look, but are not always the ones who manage town properties or work, within the community. And we're starting to see that change as the game changer with Irene and Sandy. We're starting to see more and more of a cooperation between all of those, but it really is something we really work hard at, and we need to, in the town of Greenwich, we've been really working hard to try to put all those pieces together. So I'm going to talk a little bit. This is a picture of Greenwich Point Park, and it's a park that obviously high recreation use. It's a 120-acre park. It's got a magnificent beach, tidal wetlands. It's an important bird area designated by Audubon. So it's got a lot of habitat. It's got a really important shell fisheries. All that restoration work they were doing in the Great Salt Bay on Long Island, all those clams were coming from Greenwich. We're working with TNC to get those transferred over there. So we have a really rich shell fisheries, and all centered around this Greenwich Point. So I'm going to use this as kind of a starting point for what we're looking at town-wide. So the other thing about Greenwich Point is I just want to point out, and this is about a lot of municipalities, is we also have a rich cultural heritage. And this particular building, damaged during Sandy, had just been restored 2 years. We just finished the restoration. It was built in 1908. It has a rich history, but all of Greenwich Point Park actually has been nominated for the National Register. And so that's one of the things that a lot of municipalities are also dealing with when we're talking about our coastal resources, is there's a lot of history and cultural resources that are involved. So it's not just the natural systems, but the cultural systems that we're trying to protect. So that's what, one of the things we're looking at. And if this particular cottage looks like it received a lot of damage. This was on the windward side, a lot of fetch, a lot of wave damage. We hardly had any water inside this cottage. We lucked out. The water elevation basically stopped right at the door here, but it was the wave action and then the wind that was damaging all the shingles and whatever, so we kind of lucked out with this major restoration of this building. But I just want to point out that that's one of the things. So we're looking at living shorelines and how they work. We'll look at how do we protect, you know, our coastal park, how do we protect the cultural resources, and then how do we protect, what's the role of these resources in protecting the larger community. So next. So this is Greenwich Point Park, and I wanted to show you this because you can see from the elevations, this is the contours that we did from LiDAR. This is post-Sandy, but you can see the contours. And we've got a couple of places in the park that are really susceptible and where we had some major damage. And most of Greenwich was, Greenwich Point Park was under water, as was a good part of Old Greenwich. But you can see we've got a couple of areas that are really low and where we're going to be, the potential is to have some breaching there. And why do we care about that? So just quickly, as the Parks and Rec was looking at how do we get this park open? After a storm like Sandy, everybody wants to go out. This is our park. It's kind of the recreation area. It's what they call the crown jewel park of the town. And it just is a place of solace for people, and people really wanted to get out there. So our Parks and Rec Department and Department of Public Works tried to put the park together as quickly as possible. But there's a few things, and that really has to do with the ecosystem services, is how do we look at the other things? And conservation kind of took on the role at looking at dune restoration. And then as we started working on that, we started looking at a more detailed look at all of the ecosystem services that this particular park provides for the town of Greenwich. So the next slide. And so this kind of sets up what we were looking at. So we had this area that had, you know, a lot of damage with dune damage and whatever, and the building, the cultural resource building, is right around there. We almost had a breach here. You can see by this what part of Greenwich was flooded. Now some of this, because the blue is showing from the 0 contour to 10 feet, up to 4 feet gets flooded every day anyway. That's the normal tidal range. But you can see, because of the way the LiDAR is, this is where the community starts, where the buildings are, and those are all the buildings. And you can see where we had a lot of damage, not so much here. But look at where Greenwich Point is, and this is one of the things as we started talking about doing the dune restoration and work here, we started looking at how this is. And so when you're talking about a nor'easter, when you're talking about a hurricane, we've got an east fetch coming into Long Island Sound. And so, and a lot of times it's a fetch coming this way with the storm coming in, or possibly this way. But a lot of the wind is coming in this way, and this is our beach area. This is the high erosion area. We've got all tidal wetlands in here, a really good ecosystem. So we want to protect Greenwich Point for its ecosystem value itself, but what happens if we breach here? What happens if we breach here? Basically what happens if Greenwich Point isn't here anymore? As we have sea level rise, when you look at those elevations on the previous slide, as we have sea level rise and all of a sudden this becomes a shoal, now we're going to have that fetch come and hit our residential areas, coming this way all the way across. And if you look at all of Greenwich, you can see that we've got some land areas over here. This is a really critical. We started saying, you know what, this is providing more resources, obviously important habitat and natural resources, but a bigger system than just protecting Greenwich Point when we're really talking about long-term planning. And that's one of the things we started looking at when we were starting to do just like some of the basic, like let's restore a dune, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, how is the dune going to stay in place? And so right here, for example, is where we had the dune breach, and I think the next slide might show that. So here's the cottage I was showing. This is where we started doing the dune. I didn't want to put in too many slides. We started doing the dune work, but this had all just flattened out and was going across the cove. As you saw, there was just a really narrow, this is our roadway so that people can access this park, and you can see how flat this is here. And basically the whole dune had been wiped out during Sandy. And so this is when we started saying, so as Parks and Rec was putting everything together, they weren't looking at here, and all during every storm we had that during the winter, the wind kept blowing and was covering the road with sand every single storm, wind event. So it was really wind event, so we said we need to restore this dune. I fully expect that the dune will probably not last another Superstorm Sandy, but it's doing what it needs to do. And as you know, typically what happens is in a natural system, the dune would go back to here, and then you'd have, but we don't have that. Where's it going to migrate to when we've got this, the other things going on? So we're saying, how do we keep this dune in place, but what do we maybe need to do out here to keep this dune in place? So I'll talk about that as we go along, but the next slide, please. So we did have a dune planting. We had over 100 volunteers come out and planted the dune. So this happened in early April of 2013 following Sandy, and this is what it looked like in August. So we really had good growth really quickly, and putting in the dune fences, and we're just ready to now take down the dune fences. Just to let you know, the TOA slope, we did put in a coy log filled with sand to anchor that slope, and then we built up the dune. And we actually got the elevation of the dune from previous aerial photos looking at the elevation there. So we reestablished this dune, and what this did was we don't have now this erosion and this constant wind covering up the road. So, plus we're putting back the habitat. Yes?
Did you push the sand up from the lower beach to make the dune, or bring sand in?
We had a sand everywhere because of all the work that the DPW was doing, because this whole road had sand in it, as well as all of our parking lots, so that's basically most of the sand we were using, so we didn't push it from the lower beach. As a matter of fact, from permitting, we were staying above the permitting issue, because DEP said you don't need permits as long as you stay above the high tide line, so we were staying above that high tide line and didn't go down there. So, anyway, so that's the restoration work that was done, and we've now done another dune, and we've got some others going on. But again, it was like we were looking at that bigger picture. It's like, okay, so this is protecting, but what about the long term? So next slide. So one of the things we're looking at is, again, here you got the whole coastline of Greenwich, and you can really see in this photo where Greenwich Point is, and how, okay, here's the fetch going across, protecting this area, stopping that fetch, if the wind's coming in this way, stopping the fetch here. Basically, this is our really productive shellfish cove, one of the best, most productive shellfish coves. So we want to protect that shell fishery, as well as all of these highly, developed urban areas. So that's why we're saying, like, so what do we need to do here so that we don't breach here, we don't breach here, and we're starting to look at that. So working with UConn or whatever, we started talking about it, but the town started looking at, we've got a little bit, because Stanford over here comes out, and there's a little point off the map over here that comes out to here. We're a little bit protected in this area, but we also have a tidal wetland and some rocks and whatever out here. So we wanted to look at using some reef balls or some type of other living shoreline type structure that's going to go out and protect to in front of, as I told you, that historic structure is right in this area, and go out to in front of that structure. One of the things that's difficult with the towns is I can't tell folks, Greenwich Point is going to flood, sea level is going to happen. So what we're doing is saying, but how do we protect this area and make sure that we have some of the structures in place and are creating something that it's going to flood, but can we prevent more erosion? Can we prevent the damage from, block the wave action? So that's what we're looking to do, is saying, how do we make it so that this doesn't breach if we put some type of a reef ball? And that's one of the things. And we don't know at this point, we're just starting the engineering, but these are some of the concepts we have. Next slide, and I'll show that. And this is just a follow-up. So again, this is the area, and you can see we do have a natural wetland here, and we've got the kind of a boulder thing, so we want to extend that out. We want to make sure that the dune, we did some of the dune restoration, but we want to connect that dune. There's a little breach there. And we have the same thing here, as we've got, this is starting to really erode in here, and where, once we lose that, this is a tidal lagoon already, tidal wetlands. So, what we're saying is we've got this area. What do we need to do? How do we possibly protect this using not just, the living shoreline in terms of dune restoration and whatever, but looking at some type of intertidal, like reef balls or something like that. So we've kind of been looking at what we can do, and we've got a grant in to further that. But you can see, again, we've got, this is a really productive cove, and, these are the areas that we want to protect with this type of a fetch, but further along the other areas. So those are some of the questions, and one of the challenges is we don't really know, and I'm working with, like I said, the municipal officials. So we have, when they ask, when we say we're looking at this, we want to try this, we're looking to say that this is a huge asset, more than just a town park, but getting people to understand what this could possibly do. There's a lot, as you can imagine, a lot more questions than answers, but one of the things that we were looking at with that bigger slide was looking at all of our coastal areas similarly. Do we have areas like this that we need to protect and try to maintain in place as sea level rise comes, so that we're maintaining some type of an artificial reef or whatever that will really keep that wave action down. Again, one of the hardest things we need to get people to understand is that the water elevation is the water elevation. That's, when you get a surge in, it's about still water. It's not about the wave action. And here, Greenwich Point takes the brunt of that wave action, so we want to maintain that in place. And what we want to make sure is that, how do we augment that? What can we do as sea level rises to augment so that this natural barrier stays in place to protect the town? So that's kind of where we are. And we're not sure where we're going to go with it exactly yet, because it's really in the planning stages, but that's our thought process. I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, and he can tell us what's happening in Old Saybrook.